Um, so this is gonna be very conversational. So this part of or this session is the title sake of what our program was called, which was the gift of surrender, becoming a virtuous woman. And so Elder Kate already talked a little bit this morning about the definition of surrender, and I love words. I was not an English major because I don't like to write words, but I like breaking down the definition and meaning of words. And so when we were talking about what the theme of our women's conference was going to be, I was thinking about surrender, and it was something that I was already looking over in my personal quiet time. And so I broke down what surrender means. So breaking it into two parts, sur means over or above, and render means to provide or give, cause to be or become, make, represent, or depict artistically. And so when I was thinking about that word in terms of surrendering to God, I came up with the sense that it was to give myself or to abandon myself to God, that He can make me, mold me, so that I may become, grow into, or acquire the status of stepping into the fullness of being His daughter, and being the woman that He's made me to be. But in that time too, I've also learned that surrendering, as beautiful as it can be, is also very difficult. It's scary, it's uncomfortable, and it leaves us in a position of being vulnerable. And when you think about it, you're like, but your vulnerability is fine. Like, it's good, it's healthy for you. But it's also being vulnerable means opening yourself up to someone. It's allowing yourself to be seen in the fullness of who you are. So that means the good, that means the bad, that means the in between. But the difference that comes with surrendering to God is that when we're vulnerable with Him, we're being vulnerable with the one person who can never break His promise to us. We're being vulnerable with the one person who truly knows our heart inside and out, and who has vowed to protect it, care for it, and purify it. The other thing that I've learned throughout this process, Frank, feel free to jump in anytime. The other thing that I've learned throughout surrendering is that surrender is not linear. The idea of being that we just decide one day that we're going to surrender, and in the next moment it's done. We're good to go. We've given it all to God. And the actuality is, it's a lot more difficult to take your hands off of something and to choose to go into rest. And so a lot of the times when we are dealing with surrender, when we are, the thing is that surrender is more like a roller coaster than it is like a straight line. And so, go ahead, please.
I was looking at surrendering to God and what does it mean. Um, I'm sorry. So, what I found, um, and I have this book that I've been reading, 12 Extraordinary Women. It's a very good read. It's a lot of biblical scriptures, and it talks about women of God. And I found in this book, it says surrendering to God as a woman can mean trusting God's love and plans for your life and placing your life in God's hands. It can also involve being honest and vulnerable with God and choosing to stop holding on to things too tightly. Personally, myself, I never understood what that means. But since I've been studying, I've learned, because when you hear the word surrender, it sounds like you're just giving up. But it's not giving up, it's giving in and letting God control your life. I've been a Christian for a long time, and the reason I do it that way is because um, the previous churches that I've attended, and it hasn't been a lot, just a couple, I thought and I was taught that being a Christian is saying a prayer, going to church, giving your tithes. So when we start talking about the gift of surrender, and even though we were planning, and I'm thinking, I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? What does it mean for me? So when I looked it up, and I was like, okay, it's not me trying to control. It's letting God control. And I never understood that. And when I went through my health scare a couple of years ago, major health scare, I'm trying to control what's going on in my health, in my body. But I never understood what surrendering means. And one day I was at home alone. It was on a Sunday. And I have this plaque on my wall in my dining room. And it says, faith over fear. And I used to look at that and go, how can you have faith over fear? Because when you get a major health scare, you got fear because you don't know what the outcome is. But a little birdie called Stephanie, she came over one day, and this was right after her and her husband had started dating, and she was coming to the church and learning. And she said to me, she said, Mom, you have to learn to put all your trust in God and let him take care of it. Quit worrying about what the doctors say. Quit worrying about the treatments. Go into it with a positive attitude and just let God handle it. And I thought about it. So that Sunday I was at home by myself, and I was listening to a worship service on the phone, and I just looked at the plaque and I said, faith over fear. God, help me. Tell me what that means. And it's just like this calm and this warm feeling came over me. And then I understood. He spoke to me, and I never knew. You know, I've heard people say, you know, God talks to me and blah, blah, blah. But I never understood what that meant. But that day, I felt it. I understood it. I heard it. And I'm sitting there at my dining room table, tears running down my face, and I said, God, I give it to you. I surrender it to you. That's when I knew what that meant. So from that day forward, whatever the doctor said, I was like, okay, God, you got it. I'm not going to worry about what they say. I'm not going to worry about the treatments. I'm just going to do what they tell me to do and give it to you. So what I'm trying to say is, you know, we can all be afraid, but we have to learn what fear is. Fear is the evil one putting thoughts in your mind so that you won't go forward, because he wants to keep you where you are, which is frozen in fear. But it's like what Stephanie said in the other room over there. You think of it as a trigger on a gun. You pull back, but when you release, you go forward. So you will have to release your fear and move forward. And to me, that's what surrendering is to me.
So I was also thinking about times of reasons why we don't surrender. And so when I don't surrender, I know it's because I'm functioning in my pride or my ego, or out of distrust and fear. And so when I'm functioning in my ego, I'm thinking, oh, I know what's best. I know how best to deal with this thing that's in front of me. And what that presents is I don't trust or I don't believe that God is who he says he is and that he can do all things that he can do all things, and he will do those things. And then there are other times when I'm not surrendering, and it produces a sense of fear, or it produces anxiety, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't perform, I can't show up, I can't dot dot dot. And in actuality, what I'm saying is I don't have the evidence of God showing up for me prior to this moment. And that's a lie, because I do. I can count on a number of fingers, toes, hands, whatever, of the times and the evidence that I have of God being God for me. And so when we think about surrendering and giving it up, it's not always the white flag that we've kind of known it to be culturally. Sometimes surrendering is just saying, God, I understand that I'm not able to do this in my strength alone, and I need you. And it's not bad to need God. It's not bad to need someone, but specifically God. We think a lot of times we get pride, we feel accomplished when we can do something on our own. We feel like, yeah, I did this. This was all on me. And the truth is that it was never all on you. We had this conversation, or this moment, last Sunday, where I was sharing that I realized that it wasn't on me, which is a lot of things. Is like we carry the world on our shoulders. But the actuality is that it's who's in us lifting the load if we allow him to. And one more thing. Oh, I was recently watching a sermon, and the pastor who was preaching, and pastor says this all the time too, is that you have to flip a switch. And so he was talking about surrendering, and how a lot of people would be like, well, I'm getting bored in my faith, or my faith isn't working for me, or whatever the case may be. And he was like, no, you're not. Your faith isn't not working for you. You're not working your faith. And because of that, like, you've flipped the switch for surrender off when you really need to flip it back on. And by doing so, you'll start to see the way that God moves, because you're being obedient. And so that's kind of what I've come to understand surrender to be, is choosing to be obedient to God and how he wants to operate in my life and through me. And that is scary, because it's kind of like, oh, well, it comes back into that distress of, God, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not the one you should use? Am I sure that I heard your voice on this? And all these questions start to come back up. But what I've learned the gift of surrender to be is not just the ability to take something off, take the weight off of me, but it's the gift of becoming, allowing myself to become the virtuous woman that God has called me to be. And it's the gift of rest. When we surrender, we get to lay down, and we get out of God's way. I struggle with that a lot. I'm always in God's way. But when we choose that route, when we choose to surrender, when we choose to allow ourselves to rest, it opens us up for God's power to move. And oftentimes when we act counter to that, we're holding him up. And so, again, listening to this sermon, he was talking about Hannah, and how Hannah was crying and weeping because she wanted nothing more than to have a child. And there were all these things around her that were just evidence that it just wasn't going to happen for her. And it was when she got into the temple, fell face down on her knees, praying and weeping to God, and words that Eli couldn't understand because he thought she was drunk and tripping. Like, girl, get up out of here with that. And in actuality, she was just praying. She was praying in her heart. Like Elder Kate mentioned this morning, that our thoughts are unknown to the enemy. And so while her mouth was moving, her heart was praying. And she was surrendering on bended knee to God, requesting for the one thing that her heart desired. And the thing is that God heard her. And in the same breath, that was the same thing that she had agreed to surrender. And so in giving of her and surrendering, she became a mother. She gave birth to the child that she wanted. And in surrendering, in that same surrender, she gave of her son so that he might become to be the next person that he needed to be for God to be able to continue to move us to get to Jesus. And so just thinking about all the virtuous women, whether it was Mary giving of her body so that Jesus could be born and agreeing to that, or whether it was, is it Esther I'm thinking about? Maybe. Y'all can correct me. But whether it was Esther who had finally gotten to this place where she was married and she was good, she had money, they were rich, there was nothing that she couldn't have. But when it came time to save her people, she had to surrender that title. She had to surrender the gifts that had been bestowed upon her because of her beauty and all these other things. And so the idea that there will come a time when we have to surrender, it's much easier to do so when we choose to, when we volunteer to, than when we fight against it. And I'm going to stop right here. But I truly believe the gift of surrender is allowing yourself to become who God really, really wants you to be, who he made you to be before everything else was created.
Okay, Tori, I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what you said when you were talking about Mary. Luke 1:37-38 says, "For nothing will be impossible with God." And Mary said, "Behold, the bondslave of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word." And that is the heart of surrender, confessing to God that he can do with your life whatever he chooses. Surrender is the secret to the greatest life you'll ever know. So God awaits our yes so that he can take us and lead us into the abundant life that he has already planned for us. The act of surrender is called at mani verdana. I hope I said that right. And it's surrendering is not giving up on God or ourselves. It is trusting him even when we don't understand what's happening, realizing that our minuscule status in the vast universe, and becoming humble. True surrender happens when we completely trust God. And one of the best ways to surrender to God is to be honest with him, because he's not afraid of your issues or your doubts. So he will always bless you if you seek him out and talk to him and just give him your whole heart. You know, he knows that we are human. He knows our failures and our shortcomings, but he doesn't hold that against us. You know, he blesses us anyway. And if we want to be in complete surrender, then we have to let God take control. So that's all I got. But we know it's not easy to surrender, because we all have our issues, we all have our doubts, because we're human. We all do stuff, and you may say in the back of your mind, "Ooh, I shouldn't have done that." But all you have to do is go to God and say, "God, I'm sorry. Forgive me." And he loves us. He's not going to hold anything against us, because he truly has love for all of his children, and we are his children, his sons and daughters. And we have to keep that in mind, that we're not, he just didn't stick us here on the earth And he said, okay, do whatever y'all want. I ain't going to be bothered. But we can always go to him. In our quiet time, wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, I've had to stop myself sometimes during a situation and say, okay, I'm just going to pray about it right now. Because sometimes it can't wait. Sometimes you find yourself in situations where you say, you know what? I need to pray now. And, you just have to remove yourself from situations and, certain people. So let's not look at surrendering as a bad thing. We look at it as we are letting God handle us and take control of our life and bless him, and he blesses us.